Welcome to Dreamy History, where we take a gentle stroll through time, inviting you to relax and drift into a peaceful slumber. Before we begin, make sure you are in a comfortable space. Dim the lights around you, cozy up under your blanket, and let go of the weight of the day. Take a few deep breaths. Inhale slowly, hold for a moment, and then exhale, feeling the tension leave your body. Let the world fade away as you sink deeper into comfort. In tonight's journey, we will explore the long, quiet tale of the RMS Titanic, the story of an unsinkable ship, its rise, and its eventual fall. But instead of focusing on the drama, we'll gently drift through the quiet moments that surrounded the ship and its passengers. We'll discover the simple routines, the unnoticed details, and the life of those who lived and worked on this grand vessel. So, close your eyes if you wish, and let the sound of my voice carry you back in time, where the Titanic's story will unfold with the kind of calmness you can lose yourself in as you drift off to sleep. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the misty morning, the Titanic continued its steady progress across the calm waters of the Atlantic. The third-class passengers, who were mostly located on the lower decks of the ship, began their morning in the dim light of their cramped cabins. These cabins were simple by the standards of the ship, with basic wooden furnishings. The walls, though sturdy, had the faint smell of salt water and oil from the engines below. The tiny portholes allowed a meager amount of light to seep in, casting faint, elongated shadows across the wooden floors. The morning would begin with a soft knock at the door. It was the stewardess, making sure that passengers were awake and ready to begin the day. The passengers, many of whom had traveled long distances to embark on this journey, would slowly rise from their beds, the sheets still warm from the night. The cold air of the morning mixed with the warmth of the ship's interior, creating an odd contrast, but for most, it was simply part of their day. The routines were simple. Some passengers would pull on their coats and head for the dining area, where they would be served a modest breakfast of bread, butter, and perhaps a boiled egg or two. The aroma of fresh bread mixed with the faint smell of coal burning from the ship's engines. The crew moved through the space quietly, filling cups with tea or coffee. The passengers, some of whom could hardly speak English, would nod their thanks as they ate, their voices murmuring in different languages. Though the room was bustling with activity, there was a serene, almost mechanical nature to the morning. The same tasks performed at the same time, every day, without fail. The time on board the Titanic was, for the most part, unremarkable for many of these passengers. There was no urgency, no rush to get anywhere. The ship moved slowly, its engines humming steadily below deck. The daily routine of the third-class passengers was a repetition of small, ordinary tasks: getting dressed, eating breakfast, speaking briefly with the other passengers, and then Once breakfast was done, many would retreat back to their cabins for a while, perhaps to rest or simply to pass the time. Some would take walks on the lower decks, where the scent of the ocean was stronger, and the sound of the ship's engines could be felt vibrating underfoot. The reality of their situation was rarely questioned. They had embarked on this journey with the hope of starting anew, but for now, they simply followed the rhythm of the ship. The Titanic was a grand ship, but to them, it was just another mode of transport, moving slowly through the waters of the Atlantic, carrying them toward an unknown future. Their morning routine, like their lives aboard the ship, would continue unhurried, with only the quiet hum of the ocean and the steady motion of the ship to accompany them. Down below decks, in the ship's galley, the morning routine began earlier than most passengers would have experienced. The ship's crew, dressed in their neatly pressed uniforms, worked diligently in the galley, preparing the food for the passengers. The large industrial kitchens hummed with the sounds of activity, pots clanging, knives chopping, and the low murmur of voices in French and English as the crew worked in unison. The kitchen was warm from the ovens and stoves, the air thick with the aroma of sizzling bacon, fresh bread, and the faint scent of boiling potatoes. These were not the scents of a luxurious breakfast, but of simple, everyday food being prepared in vast quantities. The work in the galley was precise, almost mechanical. The chefs had likely worked this routine countless times before, following the same steps and methods every day. The routine was ingrained in them, and there was little room for error. It was the same process: set the tables, prepare the ingredients, cook the food, and then serve. No fanfare, no ceremony, just the quiet ticking of the clock as the food was prepared and then delivered to the various dining rooms. The crew moved efficiently but quietly through the galley, their faces often set in concentration as they worked. The clink of cutlery and the soft rustle of aprons and chef's jackets were the only sounds, punctuated by the occasional call for more plates or more bread. Each dish was prepared with care, but there was no time to savor it. It was a routine that needed to be completed quickly, for the passengers would soon be ready for their meals. The simple process of cooking, serving, and cleaning would repeat itself throughout the day. The ship's galley was not a place of excitement, but of quiet productivity, where every action was guided by necessity and routine. The head chef walked through the kitchen from time to time, inspecting the progress and ensuring that everything was in order. His voice, though calm, carried a note of authority, making sure that the crew stayed on task. The sound of his shoes clicking against the hard floors was a reminder to everyone that the work had to be done quickly and efficiently, and so it was. The crew did not pause to reflect on the ship's grandeur or its impending journey, but instead focused on the task at hand, ensuring that the passengers would have their meals on time. The kitchen was a world of its own, removed from the luxury and glamour of the upper decks. As the breakfast rush approached, the food was carried up through the ship's service elevators and narrow hallways, ready to be delivered to the passengers. It was then that the crew would take a brief respite, enjoying their own meals in the staff dining area before returning to their stations. The sounds of the galley quieted down, and the kitchen took on a momentary stillness. As the rhythm of work slowed and the next round of preparations began. Once you're ready, I can begin expanding segment 2, which will focus on the biography and event narrative. Let me know if you'd like to proceed with that. As the morning continued to unfold on the Titanic, the first-class passengers, who had enjoyed their quiet breakfasts in the privacy of their spacious suites, began to emerge onto the open deck. The cool Atlantic breeze greeted them, ruffling their finely tailored coats and scarves. They walked with leisurely grace, taking in the vastness of the ocean around them. For these passengers, the morning was an opportunity to enjoy the tranquility of their surroundings, to escape the confines of their rooms, and to stretch their legs in the open air. It was a ritual, one that many passengers repeated every day, a moment to themselves before the bustle of the ship's activities began. The promenade deck, with its polished wood flooring and neatly arranged deck chairs, provided a sense of calm. The soft, rhythmic sound of the ship's engines was almost inaudible here, replaced by the distant calls of seagulls flying above. The ship moved smoothly, its wake trailing behind it in a long white streak. The ocean was a vast, serene expanse of blue, stretching endlessly to the horizon. The only other sounds were the quiet conversations between passengers as they strolled, some walking in pairs, others on their own, absorbed in their thoughts or admiring the view. There was no rush, no hurry. Time seemed to slow down as the passengers moved about the deck, their footsteps muffled by the soft carpeted pathways that lined the rails. Some passengers paused to lean against the railing, looking out at the ocean, while others simply walked in silence, enjoying the solitude of the moment. For many of the first-class passengers, the world outside the ship seemed distant, irrelevant. They were cocooned in the luxury of the Titanic, moving smoothly through the water with nothing but time to waste. For those who did not wander to the deck, the rooms provided another place of peace and quiet. The large windows looked out onto the sea, and the light that streamed through them created a soft, golden glow throughout the cabins. Passengers could spend hours sitting by the window, reading, or simply staring out into the distance, lost in thought. There was no urgency, only the slow, steady rhythm of the ship's journey. Outside, the ocean stretched as far as the eye could see, its vastness offering a moment of reflection, a pause in the busy world of first-class luxury. This morning routine was repeated every day, with the only change being the weather. On days when the sky was clouded or the wind was strong, fewer passengers ventured out, but the calm remained. On calm days, when the sea seemed almost still, more passengers would take to the deck, enjoying the serenity of the surroundings. Whether the sky was clear or overcast, the first-class passengers would begin their day in the same way, with their quiet morning strolls, their slow walks around the deck, taking in the luxury of the ship and the unhurried pace of the day. As the morning drifted into the afternoon, the atmosphere aboard the Titanic began to shift. The quiet, leisurely pace of the morning was replaced by the soft murmur of conversations and the gentle clinking of teacups in the first-class lounge. Afternoon tea was a cherished tradition for many aboard the Titanic, and the lounge was the perfect setting for this daily event. The large, comfortable chairs and soft lighting provided a calm and cozy atmosphere, ideal for relaxation and conversation. The space was elegantly designed with soft velvet upholstery and polished wooden tables. The light from the afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting gentle shadows on the floor. The passengers settled into their seats, some with newspapers in hand, others in quiet conversation. Waiters moved gracefully between the tables, carrying trays laden with delicate teacups, saucers, and small plates of finger sandwiches, pastries, and cakes. The clink of fine china and the soft rustle of napkins were the only sounds in the room, punctuated occasionally by a polite laugh or the sound of someone clearing their throat. Tea was served with the utmost care, each cup poured with precision, the steam rising in delicate spirals from the hot liquid. The smell of freshly brewed tea mixed with the faint fragrance of the pastries, creating an almost otherworldly calm in the room. There was no rush to chat with friends or family, or simply to sit back and enjoy the quiet hum of the ship. Some passengers preferred to sit in the corners of the room, where the soft lighting and deep armchairs allowed them to read or simply gaze out the windows, admiring the view of the ocean as the ship sailed smoothly through the waves. Others would engage in quiet conversation, discussing topics ranging from the latest fashion trends to their experiences aboard the ship. The tone was always calm, almost meditative, with no interruptions or demands. This was a time of rest, of gentle relaxation before the evening's more formal activities. For the passengers, afternoon tea was more than just a meal. It was a ritual, an important part of the Titanic's luxurious experience. It was an opportunity to step out of the ordinary and into a world where time moved slowly and leisurely, a time to enjoy the finer things in life without haste. And the elegant setting of the lounge all contributed to a sense of calm that would linger throughout the rest of the day. As the passengers finished their afternoon tea, the crew below deck began to prepare for their own meals. The atmosphere in the crew's dining area was starkly different from the opulent dining rooms above. The rooms were small, with simple wooden tables and benches. The light was dim, and the air carried the faint scent of food, grease, and salt. The crew, dressed in their plain uniforms, sat down to eat in relative silence. This was their time to relax, to rest from the long hours of service, but it was still marked by the same sense of routine that defined their entire day. The food was simple but filling: stews, bread, potatoes, and sometimes a small portion of meat. There was no fine china, no silverware. Instead, the crew ate from metal plates, using wooden spoons and forks. The pace of the meal was slower than that of the passengers' dining experiences, but the chatter was just as quiet. The sounds of chewing, soft murmurs, and occasional laughter filled the space. Once the meal was finished, the crew would clean up, wash their dishes, and return to their quarters. Their rooms were modest, tucked away in the lower parts of the ship. There were no windows, just small bunks and a few personal belongings. For many of them, the work was exhausting, but there was little time to complain. The rhythm of life aboard the Titanic was demanding, but it was the only life they knew. They slept in shifts, with some crew members working during the night while others rested. The gentle sway of the ship and the sound of the ocean would lull them into a quiet sleep, their minds at ease, ready for the routine of the next day. The crew's experience aboard the Titanic was one of simplicity and repetition. They didn't partake in the luxuries of the first-class passengers, nor did they have the leisure of rest that the upper-class guests enjoyed. Instead, they focused on the work at hand, performing their tasks with quiet efficiency. Their lives aboard the Titanic were marked by the same routine, day after day, until the ship's journey was interrupted by tragedy. William Thomas Stead was an influential British journalist, editor, and social reformer whose name became firmly linked to the Titanic disaster. Stead was known for his bold and investigative style of journalism, which he used to advocate for social causes such as women's rights and child welfare. He was a well-regarded figure in the journalistic world, having founded and edited several publications throughout his career. His work was deeply rooted in the belief that the press had a responsibility to bring about social change, and he became known for his investigative reporting on topics such as human trafficking, the rights of women, and the conditions of workers. Despite his prominence, Stead's life on the Titanic was marked by the quiet rhythms of an ordinary voyage. Boarding the Titanic in Southampton, Stead was en route to America for a lecture tour. Though he had the means to travel in first class, his demeanor was humble, and he was not one for grandiosity. In fact, most passengers of the Titanic were unaware of his significant role in British society. As Stead maintained a low profile, he spent much of his time aboard the ship reading books, writing notes, and reflecting on the work that had defined his life. It was said that Stead had a particular interest in spiritualism and the afterlife, a subject that occupied much of his thoughts in his later years. He was deeply fascinated by the idea of communication with the spirit world and had attended several before boarding the Titanic. Steed's interest in spiritualism may have been a source of personal comfort, as he had suffered a series of losses in his life. These personal tragedies, however, seem to have done little to dampen his resolve to continue advocating for his beliefs in social justice. On the morning of the fateful collision with the iceberg, Stead was in his cabin, likely going through some of his notes and preparing for the lectures he would give once the Titanic reached New York. He had no reason to suspect that his journey would soon come to an abrupt end. Stead's life, which had been marked by an unwavering commitment to his principles, would end quietly aboard the Titanic. Despite the chaos of that night, Stead's final actions reflected the same calm resolve he had shown throughout his life. His legacy, though deeply tied to the Titanic disaster, remains an important part of journalistic history, as he demonstrated the power of the press in shaping public opinion and advocating for the marginalized. Linking transition, Steed's life, though filled with remarkable accomplishments, was unexpectedly tied to a ship that would change the course of history. As the Titanic continued its journey, the day-to-day lives of its passengers carried on, unaware of the catastrophe awaiting them. In the evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, William Stead stepped out onto the promenade deck of the Titanic for his usual solitary walk. The gentle sound of the ship slicing through the water mixed with the soft rustle of his coat as he made his way down the deck. The air was crisp, with the faint scent of the sea mingling with the salt carried by the wind. For Stead, the evening walk was a time to reflect, a time to clear his thoughts, and perhaps to think about the work he had left behind in England, or the new endeavors awaiting him in the United States. The deck was not yet crowded with passengers, though there were a few others who, like Stead, sought the peace of the open air. Some leaned against the railing, looking out over the vast expanse of the ocean, while others walked in quiet conversation. The moon was a pale silver disk hanging above the sea, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the ship. The Titanic glided smoothly through the waters, its engines humming with a reassuring steadiness that was almost comforting. Stead, with his deep thoughts, likely felt a sense of calm, perhaps even awe at the vastness of the ocean and the luxury of his surroundings. As he walked, he would have passed the first-class dining rooms, now filling with the hum of quiet conversations and the clinking of silverware as the passengers enjoyed their dinner. The air on deck was cool, but not unpleasant. It was a moment of peace before the ship would begin its final descent into tragedy. Stead, however, had no way of knowing that this tranquil evening would soon give way to chaos. His thoughts would have been quiet and uninterrupted, his routine of walking on the deck a simple part of the voyage. It was not an unusual evening, just another calm moment on a ship that was already legendary in its own right. The evening breeze carried with it the faintest hints of salt and the freshness of the open sea. He would have paused now and then to glance over the railing, perhaps lost in thought, perhaps reflecting on the quiet simplicity of the moment. In the stillness of that evening, as the ship sailed forward through the night, Stead found solace in the gentle rocking of the Titanic. For him, it was a quiet pause before the future unfolded in unexpected ways. Linking transition, the evening, though peaceful, was soon to be interrupted by the ship's collision with the iceberg, altering the course of history. In these final moments of tranquility, Stead was like many of the other passengers, unaware of the impending catastrophe. As the Titanic struck the iceberg, the world of William Stead, along with that of the passengers and crew aboard the ship, was forever changed. The initial jolt of the collision was not dramatic in itself. It was a deep, almost imperceptible shudder that ran through the ship, followed by a moment of uneasy silence. The passengers, for the most part, did not immediately comprehend the gravity of the situation. Stead, still in his cabin, likely felt the vibrations of the impact, but it was not until the ship's crew began their hurried preparations that the severity of the damage became apparent. Stead, ever the calm presence, did not panic. Unlike many others, he did not rush to the lifeboats or attempt to flee. Instead, it is said that he helped those around him, guiding women and children toward the lifeboats and encouraging them to board first. Stead's actions during these final moments reflect the same selflessness and quiet resolve that defined his life. He did not seek to save himself, but instead focused on helping others, ensuring their safety before his own. As the ship began to tilt, the water rushed into the lower compartments, making the corridors slippery and treacherous. The lights flickered and then went out, leaving the passengers in darkness, with only the faint glow of distant lifeboats offering any hint of light. Stead, perhaps knowing that the end was near, remained composed. He did not seek comfort, but rather stayed to assist others, never losing his calm demeanor, even in the face of such uncertainty. Eventually, as the ship sank further into the freezing waters of the Atlantic, Stead was last seen, encouraging others to remain calm. His actions in those final hours would later be described as a quiet act of bravery, not marked by dramatic gestures, but by simple, unflinching resolve. He did not survive the disaster, but his actions would forever be remembered, not just for his status, but for the humanity he exhibited in the face of disaster. Linking transition, Stead's passing, though tragic, was not unique. Many passengers, though unaware of the impending catastrophe, also faced the sinking with a similar sense of composure, their actions and fates forever entwined with the legacy of the Titanic. In the years following the Titanic disaster, the memory of William Stead and his contributions to British universalism were commemorated through various memorials and tributes. However, his legacy was forever tied to that fateful night. The irony of his life was not lost on those who knew of his death. A man who had spent his life advocating for social change, for the rights of women and children, was now part of one of the most tragic events in maritime history. Though Steed's actions aboard the Titanic were not widely reported in the chaos of the sinking, those who survived remembered him as a figure of quiet strength. He was not the only hero of that night, but his selflessness and resolve stood as a testament to the strength of character that could exist in the face of overwhelming adversity. Steed's legacy, like so many others on that fateful voyage, lives on in the memories of those who survived and in the historical record of the Titanic itself. As we reflect on his legacy, we are reminded of the quiet, unnoticed lives that made up the larger story of the ship's journey. The RMS Titanic, hailed as the largest and most luxurious ship ever built, was also a marvel of early 20th century engineering, constructed in Belfast by the Harland and Wolff shipyard. The ship's design was a product of a combination of ambition, cutting-edge technology, and industrial innovation. The hull of the Titanic, crafted from steel, was considered an engineering feat of its time. It stretched over 882 feet in length, weighed approximately 46,000 tons, and was divided into 16 watertight compartments. The ship was believed to be unsinkable, a claim reinforced by its steel-reinforced design and the cutting-edge technology that the builders had incorporated into the ship's structure. The hull itself was composed of large steel plates that were riveted together in a manner that was, by the standards of the era, state-of-the-art. The plates were manufactured using high-quality steel that was meant to provide strength and durability in the event of an emergency. However, what wasn't initially recognized was the vulnerability of the material under extreme cold. The steel used in the Titanic's construction, although strong, was prone to brittleness in freezing temperatures. When the ship collided with the iceberg, the sharp edges of the iceberg caused the hull's steel plates to crack and buckle, an issue that was exacerbated by the use of wrought iron rivets rather than steel rivets, which were more commonly used for high-stress components. The rivets, which were made of iron, were not as resilient as the steel plates themselves. When the Titanic collided with the iceberg at nearly full speed, the force of the impact caused the rivets to shear off, opening up the hull in several places along the starboard side. This failure allowed water to rush into the ship's lower compartments, sealing the ship's fate. The issue with the rivets and the steel's brittleness, though not immediately obvious, would prove to be one of the critical factors in the ship's catastrophic failure. The hull's construction was not just about strength, but also about aesthetics. The Titanic was a symbol of the age's industrial capabilities and the luxury that could be afforded to the elite. Its hull was smooth and polished, almost gleaming, with only subtle imperfections in the paint. Did not consider the potential weaknesses of the material when subjected to extreme conditions. The ship was built to be a floating palace, an imposing figure on the seas. But it was also designed with an optimistic belief in human technological superiority. Ironically, many experts at the time did not anticipate the possibility that a collision with an iceberg could be so catastrophic. The Titanic's design was based on the assumption that the ship would never experience such an event. This allowed water to flow from one compartment to the next once the first ones began flooding. The belief in the ship's indestructibility led to complacency, with many passengers and crew members assuming that they would be safe no matter what. The hull, with its iron rivets and steel plates, was a key component of this belief in the ship's unsinkable nature. But when the Titanic struck the iceberg, the damage revealed the truth. The engineering, though impressive for its time, was not foolproof. The failure of the hull's construction, its rivets, its materials, its compartments, was a pivotal moment in maritime history, one that would forever change the way ships were built and the assumptions made about their safety. The Titanic's hull was both a triumph of engineering and a tragic example of overconfidence. It was built to withstand the harshest of conditions, but nature's forces, combined with a series of engineering flaws, proved to be too great. The crash was not simply a failure of one element, but a combination of factors, each contributing to the sinking in ways that would only become apparent in the aftermath of the disaster. The iceberg that struck the Titanic on the night of April 14, 1912, was not a rare occurrence in the North Atlantic. Icebergs are common in these waters, but the Titanic's ill-fated encounter with one would prove to be its downfall. The iceberg itself, though large and ominous, was not particularly unusual in terms of size. It measured about 100 feet long, 50 to 100 feet above the waterline, and extended deep below the surface. The ship's collision with this iceberg was the culmination of a series of unfortunate decisions and circumstances. The Titanic was traveling at a near-record speed of approximately 22 knots when it struck the iceberg. This was a decision that had been made by Captain Edward Smith and the ship's officers, who were confident in the ship's design and strength. The Titanic, they believed, was impervious to any real danger. The ship's size, combined with the watertight compartments and advanced technology, led many to believe that an iceberg strike could be managed or avoided entirely. However, the Titanic's speed on that fateful night would prove to be a critical error. The ship's officers were unaware of the iceberg's proximity until it was nearly too late. A lookout, Frederick Fleet, had spotted the iceberg just moments before the collision, but the ship was moving too fast to avoid it. Despite the efforts to steer the ship away from the iceberg, the Titanic's starboard side scraped along its icy surface, creating a deep gash in the hull. When the ship collided with the iceberg, the impact was not immediately catastrophic. The ship did not explode, nor did it break apart instantly. The collision was more of a scraping sensation, a low, muffled sound that reverberated through the ship. Passengers did not immediately understand the severity of the situation. Many passengers continued their meals in the dining room, unaware of the danger that lurked just beneath the surface of the ship. The damage to the Titanic's hull, however, was far more significant than initially realized. The iceberg's jagged edge sliced through the ship's hull, breaching 5 of the Titanic's 16 watertight compartments. Each of these compartments was meant to contain flooding in the event of an accident. However, the Titanic's designers had not anticipated that multiple compartments could flood simultaneously. As the first compartments filled with water, the ship's bow began to sink lower into the water, and the flooding quickly spread to the adjacent compartments. This progression of flooding was the critical factor in the Titanic's eventual sinking. The ship's officers, upon realizing the extent of the damage, began issuing orders to prepare the passengers for evacuation. However, there was no sense of urgency at first, as the ship's officers and passengers remained confident that the Titanic was capable of surviving this accident. After all, this was the unsinkable ship. Surely it could withstand the damage. It was only when the ship's forward compartments filled with water and the stern began to rise out of the water that the gravity of the situation became clear. The iceberg had struck the Titanic below the waterline, a part of the ship that could not be easily inspected by the crew or passengers. The icy mass created a series of holes in the ship's steel hull, exposing the vulnerability of the ship's construction. The water flooded in at an alarming rate, with the ship sinking faster than anyone could have imagined. The passengers who initially thought the collision was just a minor incident began to realize that the Titanic, despite its size, luxury, and prestige, was no match for the forces of nature. As the ship continued to sink, the damage to the hull became more apparent. The iceberg, though not an extraordinarily large one, had been positioned at just the right angle to cause maximum damage. Had the ship been traveling at a slower speed, or had it struck the iceberg head-on instead of scraping along its side, the outcome might have been different. The Titanic's hull, though strong in theory, was unable to withstand the specific pressures that came from the collision with the iceberg, proving that even the most meticulously engineered structures are susceptible to the unpredictable forces of nature. The iceberg, once seen as just a minor obstacle on the ship's path, had caused a disaster of unprecedented scale. It had exposed not only the vulnerability of the Titanic's design, but also the overconfidence that had surrounded its construction and maiden voyage. What was initially a quiet, almost mundane collision had turned into the catalyst for one of the most infamous maritime disasters in history. When the Titanic was first conceived and constructed, the prevailing belief was that it was an indestructible ship, an unsinkable marvel of engineering. The ship's designers, Harland and Wolff, and its owners, the White Star Line, placed tremendous emphasis on luxury and size. However, the lifeboats, which should have been a fundamental element of the ship's safety, were grossly insufficient for the number of passengers on board. This lack of lifeboat capacity was not an oversight in terms of the ship's initial design, but rather a result of the overwhelming confidence in the Titanic's unsinkable reputation. The Titanic was equipped with 20 lifeboats, which could hold a total of 1,178 people. On paper, this was enough to provide lifeboat space for only about half of the 2,224 passengers and crew aboard the ship. The decision to equip the ship with fewer lifeboats than required by law was influenced by the desire to maintain the sleek, aesthetically pleasing appearance of the ship. More lifeboats would have cluttered the deck, obstructing the grand panoramic views that were meant to impress first-class passengers. The Titanic's designers, including Thomas Andrews, the ship's chief designer, had estimated that the ship's watertight compartments would be sufficient to keep the ship afloat in case of an emergency. They believed that the ship was so well designed that lifeboats would only be needed in the most extreme cases, a belief that was tragically proven wrong that fateful night. As a result, although there was space on the deck to accommodate more lifeboats, the ship carried far fewer than necessary. The decision to limit lifeboat capacity was rooted in the hubris of the era's engineering mindset, which underestimated the possibility of a disaster on such a grand scale. When the iceberg struck, the lifeboats, which had been stored neatly on the deck in rows, became the focus of confusion and panic. The passengers, many of whom had been told that the Titanic was unsinkable, were reluctant to believe that they would need to use the lifeboats. The ship's officers, similarly, were unprepared for the necessity of evacuating the ship. Many of the lifeboats were not fully filled during the evacuation. Passengers hesitated to board the lifeboats, unsure whether the situation was truly as dire as it seemed. There was also a delay in the lowering of the boats, as many of the crew members were untrained or uncertain about how to properly launch the lifeboats. Furthermore, the officers were reluctant to lower the lifeboats too quickly, fearful of causing panic or damaging the ship's reputation. This reluctance was compounded by a critical flaw in the ship's design. The lifeboats were not equipped with enough supplies for a long voyage. While some boats did carry basic rations and a few blankets, the majority of the lifeboats were not equipped to withstand the freezing cold of the Atlantic for an extended period of time. The Titanic was equipped with lifeboats for evacuating in the event of an emergency, but there was no consideration given to the possibility of being stranded in the middle of the ocean. The lifeboats that were launched were poorly filled, with many containing only a fraction of their capacity. The first boat to be lowered, Lifeboat 7, left the ship with only 13 people on board, despite having a capacity of 65. As the ship continued to sink, more lifeboats were launched, but many were only half filled. In total, of the 20 lifeboats, only 12 of them were filled to capacity, and many of the passengers remained on board, uncertain of the severity of the situation. The lifeboat shortage was a key factor in the large loss of life that occurred that night. Even with the limited number of lifeboats, the ship's officers did not do enough to ensure that women and children received priority in the evacuation. Although some lifeboats were lowered with only women and children aboard, many boats were filled with a mixture of passengers and crew, leading to confusion and delays. The failure to implement an effective evacuation strategy meant that many passengers, especially those in steerage, did not have access to the lifeboats and were left stranded below decks as the Titanic sank. As the Titanic continued to sink, the lifeboats became an even more crucial element in the disaster. The passengers who managed to board the lifeboats were left drifting in the freezing cold water, while those who were unable to escape faced the icy depths of the Atlantic. The lifeboats, meant to provide safety and hope, became symbols of the ship's flawed design and the misplaced confidence of its creators. In the aftermath of the disaster, the lack of sufficient lifeboats became one of the most glaring shortcomings of the Titanic. The tragedy prompted changes in maritime safety regulations, including the requirement for enough lifeboats to accommodate all passengers and crew aboard a ship. The legacy of the Titanic's lifeboats, however, remains a tragic reminder of the hubris that led to the disaster. A failure to prepare for the worst, a belief that technology and design could protect humanity from nature's unpredictable forces. The sinking of the Titanic on the night of April 14, 1912, reverberated throughout the world, leaving an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of society. The disaster, which claimed the lives of over 1,500 passengers and crew, not only highlighted the fragility of human life, but also shattered the prevailing belief in technological supremacy. The Titanic had been a symbol of human achievement, a floating palace that showcased the latest advancements in shipbuilding, luxury, and engineering. Its demise, brought about by a seemingly minor mistake, was both a personal tragedy for those aboard and a profound societal loss. In the years following the sinking, the Titanic became a symbol of human hubris and the limits of technology. The idea of the unsinkable ship, which had been promoted by its builders and the White Star Line, was exposed as a dangerous myth. The tragedy forced society to confront the fallibility of human engineering and the reality that no matter how advanced a machine or structure might be, it could still be brought down by unforeseen forces. The sinking of the Titanic was, in many ways, a humbling reminder of nature's power and unpredictability. one of the most significant cultural impacts of the Titanic disaster was the shift in public perception regarding class and privilege. The Titanic, which had been constructed as the ultimate symbol of luxury, was also deeply divided by class. The first-class passengers, who enjoyed the finest food, drink, and accommodations, were sheltered in the upper decks, while the third-class passengers were confined to the lower decks, far from the grand amenities above. The stark contrast between these two worlds became a focal point of attention following the sinking. As the ship went down, the differences between the classes were made painfully evident. Many first-class passengers were able to board the lifeboats, while the third-class passengers, who were largely ignored or left behind, faced a far grimmer fate. In the aftermath of the disaster, the disparity in treatment between the classes became a source of public outrage. The sinking of the Titanic exposed the social inequalities of the time and forced society to confront the reality of class privilege. The fact that many wealthy first-class passengers survived, while many poorer third-class passengers perished, became a powerful symbol of the inequities that still existed in society. This cultural reckoning would inspire social reform movements in the years to come, as people began to demand more equitable treatment and better conditions for the working class. The Titanic's sinking also sparked a wave of artistic and literary responses, as writers, filmmakers, and artists sought to capture the tragedy and its cultural implications. The disaster became a central theme in plays, novels, and eventually films, as society sought to make sense of the loss and explore the human stories behind the headlines. The disaster's cultural significance was further amplified by the media, which turned the Titanic into a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in society. Newspapers and journals, eager for a sensational story, published detailed accounts of the disaster, focusing on the personal lives of the passengers and crew, as well as the heroic and tragic moments that had unfolded in the ship's final hours. The Titanic's story became a touchstone for the public's imagination, with people across the world following the tragedy closely and mourning the loss of so many lives. The survivors, who became celebrities in their own right, were frequently interviewed and celebrated for their experiences, and their stories were often romanticized in the media. The public's fascination with the Titanic grew in the years following the disaster, with its story continuing to be told and retold through various forms of media. The sinking became a narrative that transcended national borders and became a part of global cultural memory. As time passed, the Titanic's legacy was further solidified by the discovery of its wreckage in 1985. The site of the ship's remains, lying miles beneath the surface of the Atlantic, reignited interest in the disaster and brought the story of the Titanic back into the public consciousness. The wreck, with its decayed hull and scattered artifacts, served as a poignant reminder of the ship's grandeur and its tragic end. The Titanic's story, once a cautionary tale of the dangers of overconfidence, became a timeless symbol of the fragility of human endeavor and the unpredictability of fate. In the years following the Titanic disaster, the tragedy would continue to shape cultural narratives around loss, technology, and class. The Titanic's sinking would go on to influence countless works of fiction, from books to films, and remain a central point of reference for understanding human vulnerability and the limits of progress. The ship that had been built to conquer the seas became a lasting symbol of the perils of human ambition and the inescapable forces of nature. and as new generations learned of the Titanic, they were reminded of the profound lessons it had left behind, that no matter how great our achievements, we are always subject to the uncertainties of the world around us. As dawn broke over the Atlantic, the first-class passengers aboard the RMS Titanic woke to a life of luxurious tranquility, far removed from the more mundane experiences of those in third class or crew quarters. For these elite travelers, the morning began not with the jarring sound of shipyard tools or the labor of preparing meals, but with the soft hum of a ship moving smoothly through the water. It was a calm, unhurried awakening, far from the harsh realities faced by the majority of those aboard. The gentle swaying of the ship was felt only faintly in their private suites, whose high ceilings and ornate decor were bathed in the soft, golden light of the morning sun. First-class passengers were treated to the highest standards of comfort, and their morning routines reflected the leisure that accompanied their class. Large, plush cabins with intricate wood paneling, soft velvet upholstery, and heavy drapes were the first places where the day began. The ship's stewards, trained to cater to every need, would gently rouse the passengers, offering them a hot drink or breakfast in bed. The scent of fresh coffee and tea filled the air as passengers slowly emerged from their slumber, reluctant to leave the warmth and comfort of their beds. Breakfast would often be served in the privacy of their suites, where large windows offered breathtaking views of the vast ocean stretching out to the horizon. Some passengers, particularly those with a penchant for maintaining their social circles, would use breakfast as an opportunity to discuss the day's plans, perhaps making arrangements to meet later in the lounge or on the promenade deck. The conversation was genteel, quiet, and calm, typically revolving around leisurely topics such as fashion or the latest gossip. There was no rush, no sense of urgency. The pace of life aboard the Titanic for these first-class passengers was entirely dictated by their preferences. The idea of time was an abstract concept for many of these passengers who were used to shaping their days according to their own desires. For those who opted to leave their suites for the public dining areas, the breakfast rooms were a sight to behold. The grand dining room, with its elaborate chandeliers, polished wooden floors, and crisp white tablecloths, set the stage for an elegant morning. The meal was leisurely, with attendants ensuring that every passenger was attended to with the utmost care. They were served a range of delicacies, from eggs and bacon to fruits and freshly baked pastries. There was a quiet hum in the background, the clink of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation between passengers. This was not the bustling atmosphere of a third-class dining room. Rather, it was a serene and almost meditative experience where the passengers could enjoy their food at their own pace without any interruptions or noise. The first-class passengers, accustomed to the finer things in life, were not concerned with the business of everyday survival that preoccupied many others aboard the ship. For them, the Titanic was not merely a means of transport, but an extension of their social status. The grandeur of the ship was a reflection of their own sense of importance. Their cabins, far removed from the lower decks, offered them a level of comfort that was unmatched in most of the world. The finest linens, the most elaborate meals, and the most personal service, all were part of their morning ritual. As the morning stretched on, passengers would take time to engage in other activities to further immerse themselves in the comforts of first-class life. Some would enjoy a quiet stroll along the promenade deck, their steps muffled by the thick carpeting that lined the walkway. Others might retire to the lounges, where they could read newspapers or converse with fellow passengers. In these moments, there was little to disturb the serene luxury that surrounded them. For the first-class passengers aboard the Titanic, the morning was a time for relaxation and indulgence, a time where they could set the tone for their entire day, calm, measured, and entirely within their control. The morning routine aboard the Titanic for the first-class passengers was not hurried or stressful. It was, instead, an opportunity to luxuriate in the quiet comforts of the ship, taking full advantage of the ship's offerings and the leisure that came with their social standing. While other passengers prepared for a day of work or routine, the first-class passengers were free to indulge in whatever they pleased, the endless horizon outside the ship their only concern. After the morning's quiet rituals, the first-class passengers aboard the Titanic began to embrace the leisurely activities that were an integral part of their voyage. Life for these passengers was unhurried, filled with the kind of indulgence that only the wealthy could afford. The ship's design reflected this, offering a wealth of options for relaxation and entertainment. With no pressing schedules or responsibilities to attend to, the passengers spent their days in pursuit of comfort, each moment an opportunity to enjoy the finer things in life. For many first-class passengers, the Titanic was not simply a mode of transportation. It was an experience in itself, one that provided ample opportunities to relax and indulge in pleasures that were often reserved for the elite. The ship's grand lounges, lined with rich mahogany and soft velvet, were the focal points for many of these activities. Passengers gathered in these spaces to read newspapers, chat with friends, or simply enjoy a quiet moment of contemplation. The lounges were furnished with plush armchairs and low tables, creating an atmosphere of calm. The decor was designed to make passengers feel as though they were in an exclusive retreat, away from the concerns of the world. The soft rustling of pages, the low hum of conversations, and the occasional clink of fine china were the dominant sounds in these spaces, providing a tranquil environment for the ship's most privileged guests. Many of the passengers took advantage of the ship's advanced amenities to unwind. The Titanic was equipped with a grand swimming pool, a rarity for ocean liners of the time. The pool was lined with polished tiles and surrounded by wooden deck chairs, offering passengers the chance to relax and take a refreshing dip as the ship sailed across the Atlantic. The first-class passengers would often gather in the pool area, some for exercise, others simply to enjoy the luxury of a swim in the middle of the ocean. The soothing sound of water splashing and the faint hum of the ship's engines in the background created a peaceful atmosphere, as if the outside world did not exist. For those who preferred dry land, the ship's deck provided another area for leisure. The promenade deck was a popular spot for first-class passengers to take leisurely walks, enjoying the open air and the gentle breeze that came off the ocean. The deck, wide and unobstructed, offered unobstructed views of the sea. Passengers could stroll along the deck at their own pace, admiring the endless expanse of water, or simply bask in the warmth of the sun. Some passengers brought books with them, reading quietly as they walked, while others engaged in polite conversation, exchanging pleasantries about their journey or the ship itself. The pace of life on deck was always slow, the kind of unhurried experience that most passengers relished. The Titanic also offered spaces dedicated to more structured entertainment. The ship's grand staircase, a breathtaking feature of the first-class deck, was often a gathering place for passengers before or after meals. The staircase, with its ornate banisters and intricate carvings, was a symbol of the ship's opulence. Passengers would meet here to show off their elegant evening attire, chat with friends, or simply enjoy the grandeur of the space. There was no rush, no pressing reason to be anywhere. The grand staircase was as much a social space as it was an architectural feature, a place where time seemed to slow as passengers lingered in the beauty of their surroundings. For those who enjoyed more active pursuits, the Titanic offered a gymnasium, complete with exercise equipment such as stationary bicycles and rowing machines. Although the gym was not used by all first-class passengers, it represented yet another luxury that could be indulged in at one's leisure. The gymnasium itself was an elegant space with polished floors and large windows that looked out onto the ocean, allowing passengers to work out while enjoying the tranquil views of the sea. Those who frequented the gym were typically passengers who took their health and fitness seriously. But even for them, the exercise was never urgent. It was simply another way to pass the time and enjoy the comforts of the ship. One of the most popular leisure activities for first-class passengers was indulging in the ship's luxurious spa and beauty treatments. The Titanic boasted a sophisticated Turkish bath where passengers could relax and rejuvenate in the steamy heat. The spa treatments offered on board included facials, massages, and other pampering services that allowed passengers to unwind and feel their best while traveling across the ocean. These services were exclusive to the first-class passengers, further solidifying their privileged status aboard the ship. By midday, many first-class passengers would retire to their rooms for a short rest or simply to relax in private. The suites themselves were designed for ultimate comfort, with large, comfortable beds, soft linens, and beautifully appointed furniture. The walls were lined with rich fabrics, and the windows offered sweeping views of the sea. Inside these rooms, passengers could enjoy privacy and quiet, away from the crowds of the deck or lounge. It was a space where they could relax completely, perhaps reading a book, listening to music, or simply gazing out at the ocean. Time seemed to stand still as they soaked in the peace and comfort of their surroundings. The leisure activities aboard the Titanic were as varied as the passengers themselves, but all shared one common thread: the freedom to experience the luxury of the ship without hurry or stress. The pace of life for these passengers was unhurried and unbothered by the typical concerns of everyday life. Everything on board the ship, from the dining experiences to the entertainment options, was tailored to ensure that the passengers enjoyed a serene and comfortable journey. For these first-class passengers, the Titanic represented not just a means of transportation, but a floating paradise where they could indulge in every luxury and pass the time in the most leisurely of ways. As the day wore on and evening approached, the anticipation of dinner filled the air aboard the Titanic. For the first-class passengers, the dining experience was not just about eating. It was a grand, meticulously orchestrated event that involved every detail of the ship's service. From the silverware to the ambience, the first-class dining room, a place of elegance and opulence, was where passengers gathered for what would become a leisurely, several-hour affair. For them, dining was an opportunity to indulge in the finest foods, enjoy pleasant conversation, and immerse themselves in an experience that elevated the ordinary act of eating into something extraordinary. The grand dining room itself was a spectacle of design. Its high ceilings, adorned with intricate moldings and crystal chandeliers, cast a soft, warm glow over the space. The walls, covered in rich tapestries, reflected the lavishness of the Titanic itself. Each table, set with gleaming silverware, fine china, and crystal glasses, was carefully arranged with precise symmetry. Every detail was intentional, from the polished mahogany floors to the ornate columns that lined the dining room, creating an atmosphere of sophistication and grandeur. The sound of quiet conversations and the soft clink of silverware filled the room, adding to the sense of refinement that permeated the space. As the first-class passengers entered the dining room, they were greeted by the ship's maître d', who ensured that everything was in place for their arrival. The stewards, dressed in crisp white uniforms, moved with quiet efficiency, greeting passengers and guiding them to their assigned seats. As they made their way to their tables, passengers exchanged pleasantries, speaking in soft, measured tones. The evening was a time to relax, to enjoy a meal that was as much about indulgence as it was about socializing. Dinner began with the presentation of the first course, often a delicate or a light appetizer designed to awaken the palate. The pace was slow, each course following one after another with perfect timing. There was no rush. The entire dinner could take 2 or 3 hours, allowing the passengers to savor every bite. The waiters, trained in the art of service, moved smoothly between tables, refilling glasses and ensuring that each guest's needs were met with the utmost attention to detail. The sounds of polite conversation filled the air as passengers enjoyed their food, speaking of their travels, their lives back home, and the grand experience of being aboard the Titanic. As the meal progressed, more elaborate dishes followed. Succulent cuts of meat, expertly roasted, were served alongside creamy potatoes and perfectly cooked vegetables. The Titanic's chefs, some of the finest in the world at the time, prepared each dish with precision and care. The food was rich and indulgent, with sauces designed to enhance the natural flavors of each ingredient. A glass of wine was never far from the guests' hands, and the conversation flowed as freely as the drinks. The passengers, seated around the table, would engage in quiet, sometimes intimate conversations, sharing stories and laughter, while the rhythmic clink of silverware and the soft murmur of voices formed a calming backdrop. The dining room itself was a study in elegance, with every surface gleaming in the soft light. The tables were adorned with fresh flowers and candles, the flickering flames casting a gentle glow that further enhanced the atmosphere. The walls, lined with carved wood panels, added a sense of warmth to the space. The soft music of a string quartet played in the background, its melodies so gentle and soothing that they almost became a part of the overall ambience. It was a world of refinement, where time seemed to move slowly, and each moment was meant to be savored. As the main courses were cleared and the dessert course was served, the mood of the room remained calm and peaceful. Desserts ranged from delicate tarts to rich, creamy puddings, each bite more indulgent than the last. The sweetness of the desserts was accompanied by the clinking of forks and spoons, and the conversation became more relaxed, even reflective. Some passengers, full from the meal, would recline slightly in their chairs, enjoying the warmth of the moment. Others would continue to discuss matters of politics, art, or family, all the while keeping their voices soft and respectful of the intimate atmosphere. Once dessert was complete, the meal would wind down with the serving of coffee and tea. The cups were delicate porcelain with intricate patterns that matched the elegance of the dining room. The passengers would sip their beverages slowly, lingering over their final moments in the dining room. It was a quiet time, with the world outside of the dining room seeming distant and irrelevant. The only thing that mattered in those moments was the tranquility of the experience, the luxury of being pampered, and the company of those around them. The dinner service on the Titanic was an experience that transcended the ordinary. It was not merely about food. It was about creating an atmosphere of luxury, indulgence, and calm. For the first-class passengers, it was a chance to bask in the comfort and elegance that their wealth had afforded them. It was a time for them to relax, to unwind, and to be part of a world where everything was taken care of. In the world of the Titanic's dining room, there was no rush, no worry, just the slow, steady enjoyment of good food, fine company, and the luxury of time. As night settled over the Titanic, the evening hours offered a different kind of serenity, one that appealed to the first-class passengers. With dinner concluded, many passengers sought a quiet, peaceful place to unwind and take in the beauty of the night. The Titanic's promenade deck, with its open air and expansive views, was a favored retreat for those wishing to experience the vastness of the ocean under the soft glow of the evening sky. The promenade deck was lined with finely crafted wooden railings, and it stretched the full length of the ship. Its polished wood planks reflected the dim amber light cast from the few lamps that dotted the deck, which stood as the only source of illumination against the darkening sky. The evening was cool and refreshing, the crisp Atlantic air carrying a slight saltiness as the ship continued its steady voyage. The gentle lapping of the water against the ship's hull provided a soft, rhythmic backdrop that blended effortlessly with the quiet murmur of conversation from the passengers. For the first-class passengers, a walk on the promenade deck was an opportunity to enjoy the grandeur of the ship and the tranquility of the night. Wrapped in thick, elegant coats and scarves, they would stroll slowly along the deck, occasionally stopping to gaze at the horizon or to speak with a fellow passenger. The stillness of the night seemed to stretch infinitely in all directions, with the only movement being that of the ship slicing through the water. The moon, a pale, soft orb in the sky, cast its light across the ocean's surface, creating a silvery reflection that seemed to shimmer across the waves. For those on deck, it was as if the world beyond the ship did not exist. There was only the present, the peace of the moment, and the vast ocean surrounding them. The promenades at night were quiet, intimate affairs. Passengers moved at their own pace, often in small groups or as couples. Some walking in silence, while others engaged in hushed conversation. The sound of their footsteps, muffled by the carpeting underfoot, added to the sense of calm that enveloped the deck. There were no rushed steps, no hurried conversations. Everything moved in harmony with the soft sway of the ship. Some passengers would linger at the railings, looking out over the endless ocean, their faces bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight, as if in a private moment of reflection. The peace of the moment was a welcomed contrast to the clamor of daily life. It offered a rare chance to escape from the stresses of the world and simply be. For those who preferred more active pursuits, there were still options on the deck. A few passengers could be seen playing cards or engaging in quiet games, their voices low but content, the sounds of the games blending seamlessly with the peaceful ambience. Yet even these moments of entertainment were marked by an unhurried rhythm. There was no rush to finish the game, no need to compete or strive for victory. It was merely an enjoyable way to pass the time while enveloped in the calm of the evening. As the hours passed, the soft lights of the Titanic's cabins began to illuminate the interior of the ship, casting a gentle glow that contrasted with the pitch blackness of the ocean. For the first-class passengers, it was a signal that the evening was winding down. But the promenade deck remained a place of quiet solace for as long as they desired. Some passengers stayed for just a few minutes, while others lingered much longer, reluctant to leave the peace that the night had brought. The slow pace of life on the deck seemed to stretch time itself, offering a reprieve from the stresses and worries of the world. A few passengers might have noticed, though, that the air had grown colder, the quiet of the night increasingly heavy. But these sensations were rarely acknowledged or spoken of. Instead, the calmness of the night seemed to seep into the passengers, encouraging them to forget the rest of the world and live solely in the present moment. The gentle rocking of the ship, combined with the quiet atmosphere of the deck, offered a sense of security that allowed passengers to completely relax. For some, the promenade deck was a sanctuary, a place to find peace after the indulgent dinner, to clear their minds, and to enjoy the cool, crisp air. For others, it was a time to connect with fellow passengers, to share quiet thoughts, or to simply enjoy the solitude that the vastness of the sea offered. The Titanic, as it glided through the cold Atlantic waters, became a vessel not just of luxury and opulence, but also of peace, offering the first-class passengers a space where time seemed to slow and the world beyond the ship seemed far, far away. As the night wore on and the Titanic's grand voyage continued, the first-class passengers slowly began to wind down their evening. Dinner had been leisurely enjoyed, conversations lingered, and some passengers had taken a final, tranquil stroll along the promenade deck, basking in the calm of the ocean. Now, as the ship's lights illuminated the dark Atlantic around it, the evening moved towards its quiet conclusion. The soothing rhythm of the ship's motion against the water continued as the last few stragglers made their way back toward the comfort of their quarters. For these privileged passengers, the evening was not rushed. There was no pressing need to finish up or move to the next activity. The passengers of the first class, accustomed to the highest levels of luxury, had all the time in the world to do as they pleased. It was a way of life where time stretched, where moments could be savored without urgency or worry. The quiet luxury of the Titanic was not just a means of transport, but a floating retreat for those who could afford such comfort. As passengers filtered back inside the ship, some returned to their spacious suites, which were designed for maximum comfort and relaxation. The rooms were elegantly furnished, with thick carpets, soft, heavy curtains, and soft lighting that added a warm ambience. The cabin's decor, which included richly adorned furniture and soft, luxurious linens, created a peaceful retreat from the world outside. Here, the first-class passengers could sit in quiet reflection, reading, writing, or simply enjoying the peace of their surroundings. The hum of the ship, combined with the gentle lapping of the ocean against the hull, created a calming, almost meditative atmosphere. The stewards, always attentive but never intrusive, would quietly enter the rooms, adjusting the curtains, straightening the pillows, and turning down the beds for the night. The scent of fresh linens, coupled with the faint smell of the sea, created a comforting environment. Some passengers might have ordered a nightcap from the bar, savoring the taste of a fine cognac or a delicate champagne, sipping it slowly as the ship rocked gently in the night. A few might have looked out of their windows at the night sky or down at the vast, dark ocean beneath them, but many were content simply to retire for the evening, ready to begin the same routine tomorrow. In the rooms, soft lights from bedside lamps glowed, creating a cozy atmosphere that invited rest. For these passengers, the evening had been one of total indulgence, of complete relaxation and peace, and now it was time to close the day. The ship's officers, who had spent the evening overseeing the ship's navigation and its safe passage, would also retire for the night. Their quarters, though much less luxurious than the passengers, still offered the comfort and security of a steady routine, though it might have been a quiet, uneventful evening for most aboard. The comfort of the first-class passengers did not end with their return to their rooms. For them, the Titanic was more than just a mode of transportation. It was a sanctuary. This sense of calm and safety would have enveloped them as they prepared to sleep. There was little to worry about in their world. The Titanic, the largest and most luxurious ship ever built, was their world. In their minds, it was unsinkable, and nothing could disturb the peace they had found aboard. For some, there was the option to enjoy one final indulgence before sleep. The luxurious Turkish bath or the refined smoking room offered a space for quiet relaxation, where the rich could unwind and perhaps engage in light conversation before retiring for the night. The smooth rhythm of life aboard the Titanic, especially for those in first class, allowed for a sense of eternal comfort, a retreat from the everyday stresses of the world. The evening was designed to be enjoyed, to be slow and unhurried, where every detail contributed to the sense of ease that defined the voyage. As the night deepened, the soft sounds of the ship's interior faded into the distance, and the gentle motion of the vessel provided a constant, peaceful lullaby. The first-class passengers, now resting in their rooms, were completely insulated from the world. The distant horizon, the vast ocean, and the endless night outside seemed far removed from their thoughts. The world aboard the Titanic was one of privilege, calm, and luxury, and for them, the night would unfold in the same unhurried rhythm that had defined their journey from the moment they boarded. In these quiet, final moments of the evening, there was little sense of time or urgency. The passengers rested, their minds adrift, as the Titanic sailed serenely across the Atlantic, its lights shining brightly against the darkness of the sea. It was a peaceful, restful world, free of the concerns that plagued the lower decks. For the first-class passengers, this was the life they had come to expect, one of ease, luxury, and quiet comfort. Little did they know that in just a few short hours, their peaceful voyage would come to an abrupt and tragic end. As the night grew darker, a sense of calm pervaded the Titanic's first-class quarters. Passengers in their lavish suites, having enjoyed a peaceful evening, began to prepare for the inevitable end of their day. The gentle rocking of the ship, the steady hum of the engines, and the peaceful ambiance of the ship's finely appointed interiors continued undisturbed. But in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, a disaster was unfolding that would soon shatter the quiet luxury of the Titanic's first-class passengers. Despite the serene atmosphere within the ship's upper decks, the collision with the iceberg had already set in motion the inevitable sinking of the Titanic. While many first-class passengers were in their rooms or dining salons, unaware of the growing peril, the officers aboard the ship quickly realized the gravity of the situation. The ship's designers had not anticipated such a scenario. The watertight compartments, designed to keep the ship afloat in the event of a breach, were quickly overwhelmed as water began to spill into one compartment after another. The ship's list was becoming more pronounced as time went on. In the first-class dining room, some passengers had already begun to realize that something was wrong. The steady vibration of the ship as it collided with the iceberg had been felt, but it had been so subtle that many initially brushed it off. As the minutes passed, passengers in the dining rooms continued to enjoy their meals, though a murmur of concern began to ripple through the room. The lights flickered briefly before returning to normal, but by then, the sense of unease had begun to settle in. It was not until the ship began to tilt noticeably that the full scale of the disaster became clear. The first-class passengers, who had been living in a world of absolute comfort and luxury, now found themselves faced with the terrifying reality of an imminent sinking. Some passengers, particularly those who had been drinking, were slow to accept the seriousness of the situation. Others, more composed, rose from their tables with a sense of urgency that was in sharp contrast to the calmness they had earlier experienced. The Titanic's officers began to issue the first commands to prepare the lifeboats, and the first-class passengers were slowly escorted to the deck. The ship's crew, despite their best efforts, were not prepared for such an emergency, and the lack of training in the evacuation of such a massive ship quickly became apparent. The lifeboats, which were in limited supply, were hastily lowered into the icy waters below, and many of the first-class passengers found themselves not in lifeboats, but in desperate attempts to secure their places in the boats. For those who managed to board the lifeboats, the experience was far different from the luxury they had known just hours before. The freezing cold of the Atlantic, combined with the realization of the tragedy unfolding, created an atmosphere of confusion and fear that stood in stark contrast to the quiet, leisurely life they had enjoyed earlier. Yet, even in these final moments, the calm and composed demeanor of some first-class passengers prevailed. In many instances, women and children were given priority, with some men stepping aside to allow others to board. The lifeboats that were lowered were not filled to capacity, a heartbreaking reality that reflected the chaos of the evacuation. Passengers who had once been surrounded by fine dining, luxurious surroundings, and the steady motion of the ship, now found themselves clinging to small boats in the freezing darkness, separated from the grand ship that had once represented the peak of human achievement. The sense of privilege and security they had once taken for granted now seemed irrelevant in the face of an unstoppable disaster. Those passengers who remained aboard the ship witnessed the transformation of the Titanic from a floating palace to a sinking vessel, its grand staircase now submerged beneath the cold waters. The luxury of their surroundings seemed to disappear as the ship's tilt increased, making it nearly impossible for passengers to stay on their feet. Many first-class passengers, realizing the hopelessness of their situation, would have spent their final moments in the cold Atlantic, clinging to whatever piece of wreckage they could find. The Titanic's first-class passengers had lived in a world of unparalleled luxury, their lives untouched by the hardships faced by others aboard the ship. But in the end, their wealth and status meant little. The fate of the Titanic was indifferent to all who were aboard, regardless of their social standing. The grand rooms, the polished silverware, and the elaborate of the first-class dining room became nothing more than memories as the ship continued its tragic descent into the depths of the ocean. As the final moments approached, the last first-class passengers aboard the Titanic were either in lifeboats, struggling in the frigid waters, or fighting to survive on the sinking ship. The contrast between the earlier ease of life aboard the ship and the harrowing final hours could not have been starker. The luxury, the comfort, and the serenity of their previous experiences were shattered by the reality of nature's power, a sobering reminder that no one, no matter their social standing, is exempt from the forces of fate. In the final moments before the Titanic sank into the icy depths, there was no longer any distinction between the first-class passengers and those in lower decks. Everyone aboard faced the same cold reality. The grandeur of the ship, the opulence of the dining rooms, and the tranquility of the promenade deck were all swept away, leaving only the dark, cold waters of the Atlantic and the solemn reminder that no level of human engineering or wealth could stand against the unpredictable forces of nature. As the cold waters of the Atlantic swallowed the Titanic, it was not just a ship that was lost, but a symbol of human ambition, technological overconfidence, and societal inequality. The world watched in disbelief as the unsinkable ship, with all its grandeur, luxury, and promise, slipped beneath the waves, forever altering the course of history. The passengers, from the first-class elites to the humble third-class immigrants, were all caught in the same fate, each experiencing the tragic end of the Titanic in their own way. The story of the Titanic is one of tragedy, but it is also a reminder of the fragility of human achievements. No matter how grand, how advanced, or how meticulously planned, even the most impressive creations can be brought down by the forces of nature, fate, and the unforeseen circumstances that arise from human error. The Titanic's sinking changed the world, prompting new safety regulations, particularly concerning lifeboat capacity and the preparedness of ships in the event of an emergency. But more than that, it left a cultural legacy that continues to resonate in the hearts of those who remember its story. The survivors, though few, carried the memory of that night with them, their lives forever marked by the tragedy. For the rest, their names live on in the annals of history, but their stories are no longer just those of wealth and privilege. In the end, the Titanic's tragedy was not just a loss of life, but a loss of innocence. The belief in technological infallibility, in the dominance of human creation over nature, was shattered, and with it came a new understanding of the limits of human control. As we reflect on this tragedy, it is easy to think of the Titanic as a distant event, something from the past that we can no longer change, but its lessons are still relevant today. The arrogance of assuming that technology can solve all problems, the failure to prepare for the unexpected, and the inequality that can arise even in the most luxurious of settings. These are themes that remain with us. The Titanic's story is a reminder to approach our advancements with humility, to recognize the value of every life, and to never forget that no matter how far we've come, we are still vulnerable to the unexpected forces of nature. And as you drift off into sleep, think of the quiet moments aboard the Titanic, the calm morning strolls on the promenade deck, the serene luxury of the first-class dining rooms, and the quiet rhythm of daily life that continued until the very end. Life, just like the Titanic's journey, is often full of calm, unremarkable moments, and yet, it's in these moments that we are reminded of the fleeting nature of time and the preciousness of each day. As you rest tonight, remember the lessons of the Titanic and the lives that were forever changed on that cold night in April. Let the calm of the evening, the steady rhythm of your own breath, and the quiet peace of the present moment surround you. Good night, and sleep well, knowing that the stories of the past, even those as tragic as the Titanic's, live on to guide us.